My name is Erica. I'm 32 years old, and I still remember the day my mother chose my bully over me. It was like watching my whole world turn upside down as she smiled at the boy who tormented me, bought him gifts I'd been denied, and told me I needed to be more understanding. The look in Jake's eyes when he realized he had won still haunts me. Sometimes I wonder if Mom ever understood what her Saviour complex cost me. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone who should have protected you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Like and subscribe if you're ready to hear how I survived this betrayal. I grew up in a modest 2-story house in a middle-class suburb of Boston. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was safe with tree-lined streets and families who had lived there for generations. Our home was always filled with social work case files and self-help books, evidence of my mother Sarah's dedication to helping others. Mum and Dad divorced when I was 4 years old. I barely remember them together, just fragments of arguments and tense silences. After the divorce, Dad moved 3 states away and started a new family. We spoke on holidays and birthdays, but he was more like a distant relative than a father. Mum never remarried. Instead, she threw herself into what she called her true purpose, fixing broken people. As a social worker specializing in at-risk youth, Mum spent her days counseling troubled teenagers at a community center downtown. She would come home with stories about the kids she worked with, her eyes bright with purpose, as she described their difficult circumstances and small breakthroughs. I grew up hearing about how these teenagers just needed someone to believe in them, someone to see past their tough exteriors to the hurt children underneath. At 11, I was a quiet girl who preferred books to sports and art classes to school dances. I wasn't exactly unpopular, but I wasn't one of the cool kids either. I had my small circle of friends, girls like me, who enjoyed creating imaginary worlds and discussing our favorite novels during lunch period. We weren't the kind of kids who drew attention to ourselves, and that was exactly how I liked it. Our school, Franklin Middle School, was like most middle schools, I suppose. It had its clear social hierarchy with the usual popular kids jocks, theatre kids, and those of us who didn't fit neatly into any category. The teachers were mostly kind but overworked, trying their best to control classrooms of hormonal preteens while actually teaching us something. Everything changed when Jake Thornton transferred to our school in the middle of 6th grade. From day one, there was something about him that made teachers sigh and students move out of his way in the hallways. Jake was tall for his age with a perpetual scowl and clothes that never quite fit right. Rumors about him spread quickly. His father was in prison for armed robbery. His mother was an addict who could barely take care of herself, let alone a child. He lived with his grandmother in the rundown apartment complex at the edge of our school district. The first time Jake noticed me was in the cafeteria. I was reading while eating my sandwich, something I often did to avoid the chaos of lunch period. He walked by and knocked my book to the floor, spilling milk all over the pages. "Sorry," he said with a smirk that made it clear he wasn't sorry at all. "Didn't see you there." I said nothing. Just picked up my ruined book and tried to dry it with napkins. I hoped that would be the end of it. I was wrong. After that, Jake seemed to find me wherever I went. He called me Mouse because I was quiet or teacher's pet when I knew the answers in class. He took my pencils, knocked books out of my hands, and once stole my homework right before class, forcing me to tell the teacher I hadn't done it. They were small things, easy for adults to miss or dismiss as normal kid stuff. But they were constant wearing away at my sense of safety, one incident at a time. I didn't tell Mum about Jake at first. She came home every evening exhausted but fulfilled, talking about the teenagers she was helping at the centre. I would listen as she described their troubled home lives, their struggles with poverty and neglect, how she was sometimes the only stable adult figure they had. How could I complain about some name-calling when she was dealing with kids who faced real problems? Besides, I told myself I could handle it on my own. I was wrong about that too. As the weeks passed, Jake's bullying escalated from annoying to frightening. It wasn't just name-calling anymore. He seemed to take a personal pleasure in finding new ways to torment me. In art class, my favourite subject, we had been working on detailed landscape paintings for over 2 weeks. Mine depicted the view from my grandmother's house in Vermont, all autumn colours and rolling hills. I had stayed after school several days to get the details just right. The morning our paintings were due, I arrived early to add a few final touches. When I stepped out to wash my hands, Jake seized his opportunity. I returned to find my painting splashed with black paint, the careful details obliterated under ugly streaks. When I looked at Jake in shock, he simply shrugged. "Looked better this way," he said loudly. "Was doing you a favour." The art teacher, Mrs. Bennett, had seen nothing. When I told her what happened, Jake quickly denied it, and without proof there was little she could do. I received an extension to redo my work, but the joy had gone out of the project. I couldn't recreate what had been destroyed. But the physical destruction of my property was nothing compared to what came next. Jake somehow discovered that I had a crush on a boy named David in our class. This information became a powerful weapon. He began making loud comments when David was nearby, exaggerated kissing sounds, embarrassing notes supposedly from me. The rumors spread quickly, as middle school rumors do. David, embarrassed by the attention, began avoiding me completely. My friends grew distant, too afraid that Jake's attention would turn to them if they stayed too close to me. One particularly cruel incident happened during gym class. As we lined up for volleyball teams, Jake announced loudly, "Nobody pick Erica. She told Lucy she thinks everyone in this class smells bad and looks stupid." I was shocked. I never said that. But Lucy, a girl I thought was my friend, looked hurt. "You said something like that last week, about how immature everyone is." I had said something, but not like that. Jake had twisted a private conversation into something ugly, and now everyone was looking at me with suspicion. I stood there, the last person chosen, feeling completely alone. My grades began to slip as I found it harder to concentrate in class. I started having stomach aches every morning, a knot of dread that formed at the thought of going to school. I developed strategies to avoid Jake taking different routes between classes, eating lunch in the library when I could, becoming even quieter than before. But in a school our size, there was only so much avoiding I could do. The worst part was watching my small circle of friends gradually pull away. At first, they tried to support me, telling Jake to stop when they witnessed his behavior. But Jake was relentless, and soon being my friend came with a price they weren't willing to pay. Lunch invitations stopped. Birthday party invitations never arrived. Whispered conversations ended when I approached. By the middle of the semester, I sat alone more often than not, a target made more vulnerable by isolation. One evening, after a particularly bad day, when Jake had accidentally spilled his entire lunch tray on me, covering my clothes with spaghetti sauce that looked disturbingly like blood, I came home and couldn't stop the tears. Mum found me in my room uniform, soaking in the sink, crying quietly as I tried to remove the stains. "Erica, what happened? Why are your clothes like this?" The concern in her voice broke the dam I'd built. Everything poured out, every incident, every name, every small cruelty that had built up over months. I told her about the isolation, the fear, the constant looking over my shoulder. I told her about Jake. Mum listened, her expression growing more concerned. When I finished, she pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, Erica, I wish you'd told me sooner. No one should have to deal with this alone." Relief washed over me. Mum would fix this. She knew how to handle difficult kids. She would make it stop. "I'll call the school tomorrow," she promised. "We'll set up a meeting with the counsellor. This has gone on long enough." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Mum was on my side. Everything would be okay now. The next day, Mum called the school and scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Torres, the guidance counsellor. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Someone was finally going to do something about Jake. The meeting with Mrs. Torres was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Mum picked me up early from school and we waited in the counsellor's office, sitting side by side on a small couch with faded cushions. The walls were covered with posters about conflict resolution and respecting differences. I fidgeted with the strap of my backpack, both nervous and relieved that something was finally happening. When the door opened, I expected to see just Mrs. Torres. Instead, she entered, followed by Jake and an older woman I assumed was his grandmother. Jake's expression shifted from his usual scowl to something softer, more vulnerable, as he took the seat farthest from me. The transformation was so sudden and complete that I almost doubted my own memories. "Thank you all for coming," Mrs. Torres began, settling behind her desk. "We're here to discuss some concerning interactions between Jake and Erica." Mum nodded, placing her hand supportively on my shoulder. "Erica has been experiencing ongoing bullying, and we want it addressed before things get worse." Mrs. Torres looked at Jake. "Would you like to share your perspective, Jake?" Jake looked down at his hands. "I was just joking around. I didn't mean to upset anyone." His grandmother, a thin woman with premature grey hair and deep lines around her eyes, sighed heavily. "Jake has been going through so much. His father's incarceration and his mother's issues have made things very difficult." I watched stunned as she detailed Jake's home life. How his father had been sentenced to 15 years in prison 2 years ago. How his mother's addiction had worsened to the point where she could no longer care for him. How she, the grandmother, worked 2 jobs to keep their apartment and put food on the table, leaving Jake alone more than she wanted to. As the woman spoke, I felt something shift in the room. Mrs. Torres's expression softened with sympathy, but the most noticeable change was in my mother. Her hand, which had been reassuringly heavy on my shoulder, gradually lifted as she leaned forward, her attention completely captured by Jake's story. I recognized the look in her eyes, the same expression she got when talking about the troubled teens at her center, a mixture of concern and purpose. Jake has been through trauma that would be difficult for most adults to handle, his grandmother concluded. He's acting out because he's hurting. Mrs. Torres nodded thoughtfully. I understand. However, we still need to address the behavior. I suggest Jake attend weekly sessions with me, and perhaps we can implement a behavior contract with clear consequences for future incidents. I felt a small surge of relief. At least there would be some consequences, some recognition that what had happened was wrong. Then Mum spoke. If I may offer another perspective, she said, her voice taking on the professional tone she used when discussing her cases. Punishment isn't always the most effective approach for children who have experienced significant trauma. Jake might benefit more from additional support and positive reinforcement. I stared at her in disbelief. This was not what we had discussed. My daughter is the victim here, Mum continued, but I believe she's resilient enough to understand that Jake's actions come from a place of pain. Jake's grandmother looked at my mother with grateful surprise. That's very understanding of you. I work with at-risk youth, Mum explained, and I've seen how punitive approaches can sometimes reinforce negative behavior patterns. What these kids often need most is to feel valued and supported. Mrs. Torres seemed caught off guard but nodded. That's certainly one approach. What would you suggest? Perhaps instead of focusing on punishment, we could find ways to channel Jake's energy positively. Maybe he could join a structured after-school program. She looked directly at Jake, then her voice softening. The community centre where I work has several programs for middle schoolers. You might enjoy the art therapy group or the basketball program. Jake looked up, seemingly as surprised as I was by this turn of events. I like basketball, he said quietly. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. My mother, who had promised to help me, was now offering to help Jake instead. She hadn't even addressed the bullying, the months of torment I'd endured. The meeting concluded with a weak compromise. Jake would check in with Mrs. Torres weekly, and Mum would help enroll him in programs at her community centre. Nothing about consequences for what he'd already done to me. Nothing about ensuring my safety going forward. As we walked to the car afterward, I finally found my voice. Mum, what was that? You were supposed to be on my side. She looked surprised. I am on your side, Erica, but I'm also trying to address the root of the problem. Jake is acting out because he's been through terrible things. So that makes it okay for him to bully me? Of course not, she said, opening the car door. But punishing him won't solve anything. He needs support, not more negativity in his life. Sometimes we have to look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture. What about me? What about what I've been going through? Mum sighed. You have a stable home, Erica. You have advantages Jake can only dream of. Part of growing up is learning to have compassion for those less fortunate. The words stung like a slap. My pain was being dismissed, my experiences minimized because I was lucky enough to have one parent who cared. The message was clear, Jake's suffering mattered more than mine. That night, Mum called Jake's grandmother and arranged for him to join her youth program at the community centre. When she told me about it over dinner, her eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm she showed when discussing her success stories at work. I think this could be a real turning point for him, she said. Sometimes all it takes is one person who believes in you. I pushed my food around my plate, a hollow feeling spreading in my chest. What about me, I wanted to ask. Don't I deserve someone who believes in me too? Instead, I said nothing. The betrayal was too fresh, too confusing to put into words. That night, I lay awake long after Mum had gone to bed, staring at the glow and the dark stars on my ceiling that suddenly seemed childish and naive. Just like my belief that my mother would always choose me first. 2 weeks after the meeting at school, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Jake had become a regular fixture, not just at school, but in my home as well. Mum had enrolled him in her after-school program and often brought him back to our house afterward, claiming his grandmother worked late and he shouldn't be alone. The first time Jake sat at our dinner table, I could barely eat, watching in disbelief as he charmed my mother with please and thank yous compliments about her cooking and sad stories about his life. His entire demeanor changed around her, the sneering bully replaced by a soft-spoken boy with soulful eyes and a hesitant smile. But whenever Mum left the room, even for a moment, the mask slipped. He would smirk at me across the table or make a small threatening gesture or whisper things like, "Your mum thinks I'm awesome. Too bad she doesn't know the real you." I tried telling Mum about these moments, but she brushed off my concerns. "You're imagining things, Erica. Jake is making a real effort here. You should try to do the same." Each time she dismissed me, the divide between us grew wider. Within days, Mum's involvement with Jake expanded beyond the community centre program. She noticed his worn clothes and took him shopping for new ones. When she saw him struggling with homework, she spent hours helping him cancelling our traditional Friday movie nights to do so. She bought him school supplies, books, and even video games to give him positive ways to channel his energy. "Jake hasn't had many advantages in life," she would say when I questioned these gifts. "A little generosity can go a long way in helping him feel valued." What hurt most was seeing how much time and attention Mum lavished on Jake, while increasingly treating me as an afterthought. She had always been busy with work, but she had also always made time for me for our special traditions and moments together. Now those moments were interrupted or forgotten entirely as Jake's needs took precedence. One evening, I overheard Mum on the phone with her colleague. "The transformation in Jake is remarkable," she said, her voice warm with pride. "It just shows what a difference one person can make in a child's life. It's the most rewarding work I've ever done." I stood in the hallway, unnoticed, something cold and heavy settling in my stomach. The most rewarding work she'd ever done. More rewarding than being my mother, apparently. At school, Jake's bullying hadn't stopped, it had merely evolved. Now armed with intimate knowledge of my home life and my mother's favour, he had new weapons to use against me. "Your mum showed me your baby pictures yesterday," he told me one day at school. "She said I'm like the son she never had. Guess she got tired of just having you." Another day, "Your mum's helping me apply for that summer camp you went to last year. She says I'd appreciate it more than you did." The worst incident happened about 3 weeks after Jake entered our lives. I kept a journal, a place where I wrote about my feelings, my dreams, and increasingly my pain over Mum's betrayal. I always kept it hidden in my room, tucked between my mattress and box spring. Somehow Jake found it. I discovered it missing on a Tuesday morning and spent the day in panic searching everywhere. After school, Jake cornered me near the bike racks. "Looking for this?" he asked, pulling my journal partway out of his backpack. "Got some interesting stuff in here. Wonder what everyone would think if they knew how you really feel about your mum, or that boy David you're still obsessing over." "Give it back," I pleaded. "Please, Jake. Those are my private thoughts." "Maybe, if you do my English assignment for me." I ended up writing his paper, a 5-page essay on the outsiders, staying up until midnight to complete it after finishing my own homework. When I handed it to him the next day, he returned my journal, but the damage was done. I no longer felt safe, even in my own thoughts. That evening, I tried one more time to tell Mum what was happening. I found her in the kitchen preparing dinner. Jake expected to join us in less than an hour. "Mom, I need to tell you something important." Jake took my journal. He read it and blackmailed me into doing his homework. Mum turned from the stove, frowning. "Erica, that's a serious accusation. Are you sure you didn't just misplace your journal, and why would Jake need you to do his homework? He's been doing so well in school lately." "Because he's not actually doing the work. He's manipulating everyone, including you." Her expression hardened. "I think you're jealous of the attention Jake is receiving. I understand that might be difficult for you, but making up stories isn't the answer." "I'm not making it up. Why won't you believe me?" "Because Jake has been nothing but respectful in this house. I've seen real growth in him over these past weeks. What I'm seeing from you, on the other hand, is resentment and an unwillingness to show compassion to someone who has had a much harder life than you." I stared at her, speechless. In her eyes, I was the problem. The selfish daughter who wouldn't share her mother with a boy who needed her more. As I turned to leave the kitchen, Mum called after me. "We're having dinner in half an hour. I expect you to be civil when Jake arrives." I didn't answer. What was the point? In this new reality, Jake could do no wrong, and I could do nothing right. Later that evening, I overheard Mum on the phone again, telling a friend how rewarding it was to see Jake blossom under her care. "It makes all the effort worthwhile," she said. "This is why I became a social worker, to make this kind of difference." I closed my bedroom door quietly, no longer able to bear hearing how fulfilling she found her role in Jake's life, while seemingly forgetting her role in mine. A month after Jake became a fixture in our lives, my mother decided to celebrate his improved grades with a special gift. I came home from school to find her wrapping a large box in the living room. "What's that?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. "A surprise for Jake," she said, smiling as she taped down colourful paper. He brought his math grade up from a D to a B. That's worth celebrating, don't you think? I stepped closer and caught a glimpse of the box beneath the wrapping paper. It was a PlayStation, the exact model I had been asking for since my birthday 6 months ago. Mum had told me we couldn't afford it, that it was an unnecessary expense. You bought him a PlayStation. The words came out higher than I intended, squeezed through a suddenly tight throat. Mum seemed oblivious to my distress. Yes, he mentioned enjoying video games, and I thought this would be a positive reward for his hard work. Plus it will give him something constructive to do after school instead of wandering around his neighbourhood. I asked for a PlayStation for my birthday. You said we couldn't afford it. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face, quickly replaced with a defensive frown. That was different, Erica. Our financial situation has improved since then. Besides, this is an investment in Jake's progress. An investment. As if Jake were a stock that would yield returns while I was simply an expense. That weekend was my 12th birthday. Mum had always made birthdays special with decorations, my favourite foods, and a day dedicated to doing whatever I wanted. This year, she scheduled a dinner at my favourite restaurant, but kept checking her watch throughout the meal. The reason became clear when she rushed us through dessert. I'm sorry to cut this short, but I promised to take Jake shopping for shoes. He's outgrown his only pair, and he has a presentation at school on Monday. My birthday dinner, the one tradition that had survived Jake's arrival in our lives, was being abbreviated for him. Something broke inside me that night, a final thread of hope that things might return to normal. The weeks that followed were the darkest I had ever experienced. I began having trouble sleeping, lying awake for hours, replaying the day's humiliations or anxiously anticipating tomorrow's. I lost my appetite picking at food during meals, where Jake dominated the conversation and my mother's attention. My clothes began hanging looser as I lost weight, but Mum didn't seem to notice. She was too busy marvelling at how Jake was filling out with regular meals. School became a daily ordeal. Each morning I would wake with a knot of dread in my stomach, sometimes becoming physically ill before it was time to leave. I developed rituals to avoid Jake's elaborate routines of timing and alternative routes between classes. But he always seemed to find me armed with new taunts centered around my mother's preference for him. The only person who noticed my declining state was Mrs. Bennett, my art teacher. Art class had once been my sanctuary, but after Jake destroyed my painting, even that joy had diminished. Still, I continued to show up early to work on projects, finding some peace in the empty classroom, with just Mrs. Bennett quietly preparing for the day. One morning she sat down across from me as I listlessly added colour to a still life. "Erica," she said gently, "I'm concerned about you. You don't seem like yourself lately. Is everything okay?" The simple kindness in her voice nearly undid me. When was the last time someone had asked how I was doing and actually waited for an answer? "I'm fine," I said automatically, the lie bitter on my tongue. Mrs. Bennett didn't push, but she didn't leave either. She just sat there, a calm presence, offering silent support. Something about her patience, her willingness to simply be there with me, broke through the walls I had built. Words started spilling out hesitantly at first, then in a rush. I told her about Jake's bullying, about my mother's complete absorption in saving him, about feeling erased in my own home. I told her about the gifts, the cancelled plans, the constant comparison, where I always came up short because my life wasn't tragic enough to warrant attention. Mrs. Bennett listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finally ran out of words, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for trusting me with this, Erica. What you're going through isn't okay, and it isn't your fault." Those simple words, the validation that my pain was real and legitimate, brought tears to my eyes. "I think we need to talk to your mother," Mrs. Bennett said. "Would it be all right if I arrange a meeting, just you, me, and her?" The thought terrified me, but I also felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe if another adult was involved, one my mother respected, she would finally hear me. Mrs. Bennett arranged the meeting for after school that Friday. Jake would be at basketball practice, giving us privacy. As I sat in Mrs. Bennett's classroom waiting for my mother to arrive, my stomach churned with anxiety. What if this made things worse? What if Mum saw this as another betrayal, further proof that I was the problem? Mum arrived looking harried but professional in her work clothes. "I'm not sure what this is about, Mrs. Bennett, but I have a busy schedule today." "Thank you for making time," Mrs. Bennett said. "I asked for this meeting because I'm concerned about Erica." Mum glanced at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and impatience. "What's going on?" Mrs. Bennett spoke carefully. Erica has shared some concerning information with me about her home situation and ongoing bullying issues with a student named Jake Thornton. Mum's posture immediately stiffened. Jake has had a difficult life. He's making remarkable progress with the right support and encouragement. I understand he's important to you, Mrs. Bennett acknowledged, but I'm here to talk about Erica. Her grades are slipping, she's lost weight, and she's showing signs of depression and anxiety. All teenagers go through difficult phases, Mum said dismissively. Erica has always been sensitive. This isn't normal teenage angst, Mrs. Bennett insisted. From what Erica has told me, she feels replaced in her own home. She's being bullied at school by the same boy who's receiving privileges and gifts at home. Mom's face flushed. You don't understand the bigger picture. Jake comes from a broken home. He needs positive influences and stability. And what does your daughter need? Mrs. Bennett asked quietly. There was a moment of tense silence before Mum answered. Erica has everything she needs. Sometimes we have to sacrifice for those who need more help. I would think a teacher would understand the importance of lifting up the most vulnerable. The words hit me like a physical blow. I was an acceptable sacrifice for Jake's redemption. Mum, I said, my voice breaking. What about me? I'm your daughter. The raw pain in my voice seemed to catch her off guard. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then her expression hardened again. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This selfishness, this inability to think beyond your own comfort. I raised you to be compassionate, Erica. I couldn't bear to hear any more. With a choked sob, I grabbed my backpack and ran from the room, ignoring Mrs. Bennett's call to come back. I ran until I reached the girls' bathroom at the end of the hall, locked myself in a stall, and finally let the tears flow freely. My own mother had made it perfectly clear Jake's needs would always come before mine. In her quest to save him, she had deemed me expendable. After the disastrous meeting with Mrs. Bennett, I stopped trying to make my mother understand. What was the point? She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. Instead, I focused on survival, on getting through each day with as little contact with Jake and as little pain as possible. I began skipping school, something I had never done before. Not every day, just enough to give myself breathing room when things became too overwhelming. I discovered that the public library opened at 9, providing a warm, quiet place to hide for hours. I would find a secluded corner in the biography section, surrounded by the lives of people who had overcome far worse circumstances than mine, and lose myself in books or homework. On days when I did attend school, I became a ghost, moving quickly between classes, eating lunch in bathroom stalls, speaking only when directly addressed by teachers. My grades continued to slide, but I couldn't bring myself to care. What was the point of achievement if the one person whose approval I wanted was focused elsewhere? At home, I made myself scarce whenever Jake was around, which was increasingly often. Mum began picking him up from school most days, bringing him home for dinner and homework sessions that stretched into the evening. I would take a sandwich to my room, claiming I had too much homework to join them. Mum would frown disapprovingly, but rarely press the issue. Her frustration with what she called my acting out grew with each passing week. I don't understand why you can't make an effort with Jake, she would say. He's trying so hard to connect with you. The irony was bitter. Jake wasn't trying to connect, he was enjoying his complete victory, the total displacement of me in my mother's affections. And he was becoming bolder in his provocations, secure in the knowledge that Mum would never believe me over him. The breaking point came when I discovered someone had been in my room while I was at school. My dresser drawers were slightly ajar, items moved from their usual places. Nothing valuable was missing, but the invasion of privacy left me shaking with anger and fear. I knew immediately who was responsible. When I confronted Mum that evening, her response was predictable. Why would Jake go through your things? What would be the point? You probably just forgot how you left your room this morning. I didn't forget. Someone was in there moving my stuff around. Even if someone was in your room, which I doubt, it was probably an accident. Maybe I went in to put away laundry. Did you move my jewelry box? Did you take out my diary and put it back with the lock facing the wrong way? Did you rearrange the books on my nightstand? Mum sighed heavily. Erica, this paranoia needs to stop. I'm starting to worry about your mental health. My mental health. As if my deterioration was a separate phenomenon from what was happening around me, as if I were creating problems where none existed. The next day, I came home to find Jake alone in our house. Mum had given him a key, apparently, and he had arrived before either of us. The smirk on his face when I walked in made my blood run cold. Your mum said I could wait here until she gets home, he said, sprawled on our couch like he owned it. She's picking up pizza for dinner. I headed straight for my room, but his voice stopped me. I wouldn't go in there if I were you. Looks like someone made a real mess. My room had been ransacked. Drawers pulled out, clothes scattered across the floor, books thrown from shelves. The posters on my walls had been torn down, my bedding stripped and dumped in a heap. In the centre of the destruction sat my jewellery box, open and empty, the few nice pieces I owned nowhere to be seen. When Mum arrived home 20 minutes later, Jake was in the kitchen getting plates for the pizza, the picture of helpfulness. I was still standing in the doorway of my room, too shocked and numb to even begin cleaning up. "Mum," I called out, my voice thin and wavering. "You need to see this." She came upstairs, pizza box still in hand, and stopped short at the sight of my destroyed room. "What happened here?" "Ask Jake. He was alone in the house when I got home. He practically admitted he did it." Mum's eyes narrowed. "That's a very serious accusation, Erica. Jake has given me no reason to think he would do something like this. No reason. He's been tormenting me for months. He destroyed my painting, stole my journal, and now this. How can you not see it?" "What I see is a room that could have been messed up by anyone. Maybe you did this yourself to try to get Jake in trouble." The suggestion was so outlandish, so fundamentally unfair, that I couldn't even find words to respond. In what world would I destroy my own things to frame Jake? "My jewelry is missing," I finally managed to say. "Are you sure you didn't misplace it or loan it to a friend?" "I'm sure it was in my jewelry box this morning." Jake appeared in the doorway behind Mum, his expression concerned, but his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Whoa, what happened in here? Did someone break in?" "Erica seems to think you did this," Mum said, her tone making it clear how unlikely she found the accusation. Jake's face registered perfect shock. "Me, why would I trash your room? That's crazy." Mum turned to me, her expression stern. "See, Jake had no reason to do this. I think you owe him an apology." An apology to the person who had systematically destroyed my sense of safety, who had taken everything from me, including my mother's trust. It was too much. Something inside me snapped. "I'm calling Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mum's eyes widened. "Your father, why would you call him about this?" "Because he might actually believe me." I had never used my father as a threat before. My relationship with him was distant at best, our contact limited to obligatory holiday calls and occasional emails. But in that moment, he represented an escape, a potential ally in a house where I had none. I shut myself in the bathroom, the only room with a lock, and called my father's number with shaking hands. When his voice came on the line, formal and slightly surprised, I broke down completely. "Dad," I sobbed, "I need help. I can't stay here anymore." "Erica, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" The concern in his voice only made me cry harder. When was the last time anyone had worried about me being hurt? Between sobs, I poured out everything that had happened over the past months. Jake's bullying, Mum's complete devotion to him, the gifts, the neglect, the constant gaslighting when I tried to tell the truth. The destroyed room was just the final straw in a long series of betrayals. Dad listened, asking occasional questions, but mostly letting me talk. When I finally ran out of words, the line was quiet for so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "I'll be there tomorrow," he finally said, his voice tight with anger. "Pack a bag, Erica. Enough for a few days. We'll figure out the rest once I'm there." "You believe me?" I asked in a small voice. "Of course I believe you. You're my daughter." Simple words, but they washed over me like a healing balm. Someone believed me. Someone was coming to help. When I emerged from the bathroom, Mum was waiting, her arms crossed. "What did you tell your father?" "The truth. He's coming tomorrow." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Tomorrow, Erica, you're overreacting. We can sort this out ourselves. Like we've sorted out everything else by you taking Jake's side every single time." I walked past her to my ruined room and began picking up my scattered belongings. Mum followed, still trying to manage the situation. "This is ridiculous. Your father lives 3 states away. He can't just show up and interfere in our lives because you're having a tantrum." I continued cleaning in silence. Nothing she said mattered anymore. Help was coming. True to his word, Dad arrived the next afternoon. I was sitting on the front steps waiting when his car pulled up, a small duffel bag packed beside me. He looked older than I remembered, his hair, greyer lines deeper around his eyes. But his hug was solid and real, the first time in months I had felt truly safe. Mum came out as we were embracing, her expression a mixture of anger and apprehension. "Michael, I wasn't expecting you until later." "Sarah." His voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. "We need to talk." If this is about Erica's room, I've already spoken to her about making false accusations. Dad's arm tightened around my shoulders. This is about a lot more than a room, Sarah. This is about you neglecting our daughter while playing Saviour to a boy who's been terrorizing her. They moved inside the argument, quickly escalating. I sat in the living room listening as Dad laid out everything I had told him, his voice rising with each detail. Mum's responses grew increasingly defensive, insisting I was exaggerating, that I was jealous, that I didn't understand the importance of the work she was doing with Jake. Your work, Dad finally shouted. She's your daughter, not a case study, not some project you can put aside when something more interesting comes along. You have no right to judge my parenting, Mum fired back. You've been an absentee father for 8 years. At least I know the difference between being a parent and being a social worker. You've completely lost perspective, Sarah. Their voices carried through the house, old wounds reopening alongside new accusations. I sat frozen, both relieved that someone was finally fighting for me and terrified of what would happen next. The front door opened without a knock and Jake walked in, stopping short at the sight of my father. For once he looked uncertain, his usual confidence faltering. Is Ms. Miller here? He asked, eyes darting between Dad and me. Mum emerged from the kitchen, her face flushed from arguing. Jake, I'm sorry I forgot to call you. We're having a family situation today. Dad turned to look at Jake, his expression hardening. So you're the famous Jake, the boy who's been making my daughter's life hell while her mother buys you video games. Jake immediately shifted into the role of innocent victim, his voice soft and his eyes downcast. I don't know what Erica's been saying, sir, but I've been trying really hard to be her friend. She just doesn't like me because her mom helps me sometimes. It was a masterful performance, one that had fooled every adult at school and certainly fooled my mother. But something in me snapped at seeing him play the victim one more time. All the fear and hurt of the past months crystallized into a cold, clear anger. Stop lying, I said, standing up. Just stop. You've been tormenting me for months. You ruined my painting and art class. You stole my journal and blackmailed me. You turned everyone at school against me. You trashed my room yesterday when no one was home. I didn't, Jake protested, looking to my mother for support. Ms. Miller, I would never do those things. Mum moved to stand beside him protectively. Erica, that's enough. But I couldn't stop, not now. The dam had broken and everything poured out. You smirk at me when Mom isn't looking. You whisper threats. You tell everyone at school that my mom likes you better than me, and guess what? They believe you because it's true. My voice broke on the last word. The jewelry box. I continued, struggling to keep my voice steady. The one you emptied yesterday. It had a locket with a picture of my grandmother who died when I was 7. It was the last thing she gave me. What did you do with it? A flicker of something crossed Jake's face, too quick to interpret. Guilt, fear, triumph. I don't know anything about a locket, he said, but his voice wavered slightly. Dad stepped forward. Empty your pockets, son. You can't make me do that, Jake said, backing up toward Mum. Ms. Miller, he can't do that, right? Mum looked uncertain for the first time. Jake, if you don't have anything, it wouldn't hurt to show us. You don't believe me. After everything, his voice rose in genuine panic. I thought you were different. I thought you actually cared about me. The emotional manipulation was so transparent that I expected Mom to see through it instantly. Instead, she softened, reaching for him. Of course I care about you, Jake. I'm just trying to resolve the situation. By treating me like a criminal, just like everyone else does. He was working himself into a full victim meltdown, the kind that had always worked on Mum before. But Dad wasn't having it. Either empty your pockets voluntarily, or we call the police and report the theft. Your choice. The word police seemed to penetrate Jake's performance. His eyes darted toward the door, calculating his chances of escape. Fine, he muttered finally. But I didn't take anything. He began pulling items from his pockets, loose change, a crumpled homework assignment, a small pocket knife that made Mum gasp, and finally, reluctantly, a small velvet pouch that I recognized immediately. My locket. The room went completely silent. Jake stood with the evidence of his lie, literally in his hand, his facade cracking visibly. For the first time, Mum looked at him with something other than blind faith. She looked uncertain, confused, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. I was just borrowing it, Jake said weakly. I was going to give it back. No one believed him, not even Mum. I want to live with Dad, I said into the silence. The words came out clear and firm, surprising even me with their certainty. I can't stay here anymore. Mum turned to me, shock replacing her confusion. "Erica, no, we can work this out. Things will be different now." But I knew they wouldn't be. Even if she finally saw Jake for what he was, the damage had been done. She had chosen him over me, repeatedly had dismissed my pain, had made me feel like an inconvenience in my own home. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple apologies. "I'm going with Dad," I repeated. "I've already packed." In that moment, looking at my mother's stricken face and Jake's crumbling facade, I felt no triumph, no vindication. Only a profound sadness for what had been lost and could never be fully recovered, my complete trust in my mother's love. 6 months after that explosive confrontation in our living room, I found myself sitting on the back porch of my father's house, watching lightning bugs rise from the grass as dusk settled over a different neighborhood, a different life. The move had happened quickly after that day, a flurry of arrangements between shell-shocked parents and confused school administrators. Dad had taken emergency family leave, found a good therapist in his town, and enrolled me in a new school mid-semester. My new home was nothing like the one I had left. Dad and his wife Lisa lived in a sprawling farmhouse-style home with a wraparound porch and too many windows to count. Their twins, my half-brothers Ethan and Noah, were 6 years old and considered me something between a fascinating novelty and a built-in babysitter. Lisa, whom I had met only twice before moving in, welcomed me with a gentle warmth that asked for nothing in return. The first few weeks had been the hardest. I jumped at loud noises, flinched when anyone moved too quickly near me, and regarded every new person with wary suspicion. I waited for the other shoe to drop for this new safety to reveal itself as temporary or conditional. Dr. Reynolds, my therapist, called it a trauma response. "Your sense of security was systematically undermined," she explained during one of our twice-weekly sessions. "It will take time to rebuild trust, not just in others, but in your own perceptions." She was right. For months after the move, I would catch myself doubting my own memories, wondering if perhaps I had exaggerated Jake's bullying or my mother's neglect. Dr. Reynolds helped me recognize this as the result of gaslighting, a term I had never heard before, but which described my experience perfectly. "Your feelings and experiences were repeatedly invalidated," she said. "It's natural that you internalize some of that doubt. Our goal is to help you trust your own reality again." Slowly, painfully, I began to heal. Dad and Lisa gave me space when I needed it and support when I asked for it. They never pushed me to talk about my mother, but listened when I chose to. The twins, oblivious to the complexities of the situation, simply accepted me as their big sister, who could reach the high shelves and knew how to make perfect chocolate chip cookies. At my new school, I started fresh. No Jake, no whispered rumors, no history of humiliation. I was just Erica, the new girl from Boston, who liked art and kept to herself at first. Gradually, I made a few friends, joined the art club, even went to a school dance with a group of girls from my English class. Normal teenage experiences that had seemed impossible just months before. Mum and I had limited contact at first. The hurt was too raw, the trust too broken for anything more. We spoke on the phone every other Sunday, conversations that started stilted and formal before gradually finding a cautious rhythm. She sent care packages with books she thought I might like, and art supplies selected with careful attention to my preferences. Small gestures of acknowledgement and regret. 3 months after I left, Mum started attending family therapy sessions with Dr. Reynolds. She made the 3-hour drive twice a month, staying at a hotel nearby. Those first sessions were brutal, filled with tears and painful truths long suppressed. Mum struggled to accept her role in what had happened, vacillating between defensive justifications and crushing guilt. "I was trying to help him," she said, during one particularly difficult session. "I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," I responded, my voice steady, despite the tears tracking down my face. "You chose him, over and over. You made me feel like I didn't matter in my own home." "I thought I was teaching you compassion," she whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing." What about compassion for me? I asked the question I had wanted to ask for so long. Why didn't I deserve the same concern you gave him? She had no answer, at least not then. But the question hung in the air between us, demanding eventual resolution if we were to rebuild any kind of relationship. As for Jake, his brief reign in our lives ended abruptly after the confrontation. According to Mum, his grandmother removed him from our school district entirely after additional bullying incidents came to light. Mum withdrew from his case at the community centre, a professional boundary she should have maintained from the beginning. Last I heard, he had been placed in a structured program for troubled youth, the kind of environment that might actually address his behaviour rather than excuse it. Mum's saviour complex, as Dad called it, didn't disappear overnight. Dr. Reynolds helped her recognize how her professional identity had overshadowed her role as a mother, how her desire to fix broken people had blinded her to the needs of her own child. It was a painful reckoning, one that forced her to examine patterns that stretched back to her own childhood, and her relationship with her alcoholic father, whom she had tried desperately to save until his death when she was 16. "I became a social worker to help kids like me," she admitted during a session 6 months into our therapy. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the difference between my clients and my daughter. I started seeing you as stronger, more resilient, less in need because your pain wasn't as visible as theirs." It wasn't a complete explanation or a perfect apology, but it was honest. It was a start. As summer approached, bringing with it my 13th birthday, Mum and I began to establish new boundaries and expectations. She would remain in Boston, and I would stay with Dad, our arrangement that once would have devastated her, but which she now accepted as necessary for my well-being. I would spend 2 weeks with her during summer break and alternating holidays. Our relationship would be rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, with no shortcuts or quick fixes. One warm evening in June, Mum called outside our regular Sunday schedule. I answered with some trepidation, still wary of unexpected changes. "I found something I think belongs to you," she said after our initial greetings. I was cleaning out the guest room closet and found a small box pushed to the back. "It has your grandmother's locket inside." The locket that Jake had stolen, that had been returned that awful day. I had assumed it was packed with my other belongings during the move. Learning it had been hidden away, perhaps by Jake, in a final act of spite, reopened a wound I thought had healed. "I'm so sorry, Erica," Mum continued, her voice thick with emotion. "For this, for everything. I know words aren't enough, but I want you to know I'm working every day to be better, to deserve your trust again someday." I closed my eyes, phone pressed to my ear, and let myself feel the complicated tangle of emotions her words evoked. Anger, yes, but also a tentative hope. Not for an instant restoration of what was broken, but for something new and perhaps eventually stronger. "I know you are, Mum," I said finally. "I am too." As I sat on the porch steps that evening, watching fireflies and reflecting on the journey of the past year, I realized that healing isn't linear. It comes in fits and starts, in small victories and occasional setbacks. The pain of betrayal doesn't vanish, but its edges soften with time and understanding. My mother's Saviour complex had nearly destroyed our relationship, had left wounds that would always be part of our shared history. But in confronting that painful truth, we had both begun to grow beyond it. Mum was learning that she couldn't fix everyone, that sometimes her help wasn't what people needed most. I was learning that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, that my feelings and needs were valid, even when they were inconvenient for others. These were hard lessons bought at a high price. But sitting there under a sky full of emerging stars in a home where I felt safe and valued, I understood something important. Sometimes the people who should protect us fail in that duty. When that happens, we have choices. We can stay and keep hoping for change that may never come. We can leave and cut those ties completely. Or we can do what I was attempting: establish new boundaries, demand the respect we deserve, and decide for ourselves what role those people will play in our lives going forward. It isn't easy. There are days when the old hurt rises fresh and raw, when forgiveness seems impossible. But there are also days when I catch glimpses of the mother I remember, from before, the one who loved me without conditions or comparisons. On those days, I allow myself to hope that we might find our way back to each other, not as we were, but as we could be, both a little wiser, a little more compassionate, and infinitely more honest about our imperfect, complicated love. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely choose someone else over you? How did you handle that betrayal? Drop a comment below to share your experience. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and healing. Remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps you navigate your own path to healing, whatever that looks like for you.